Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. Today we're going to see the special bond that George Harrison had with his mother, Louise Harrison. So George was born on the 25th of February, 1943, and he was the youngest son of Harold and Louise Harrison. When Louise was pregnant with George, she often listened to the weekly broadcast Radio India. Harrison's biographer, Joshua Green, wrote, "Every Sunday she tuned in to the mystical sounds evoked by the sitars and tablas, hoping that the exotic music would bring peace and calm to the baby in the womb." I guess George was introduced to Indian music at an earlier date than when he went to India with the Beatles. So the early life, for the first 4 years of his life, Harrison lived at 12 Arnold Grove, a terraced house on the cul-de-sac, and the home had an outdoor toilet, and its only heat came from a single coal fire. And then in 1949, the family was offered a council house and moved to 25 Upton Green. In Wikipedia, Patty Boyd stated that Harrison's mother was particularly supportive. All she wanted for her children is that they should be happy, and she recognized that nothing made George quite as happy as making music. So Louise was an enthusiastic music fan, and she was known among her friends for her loud singing voice, which at times startled visitors by rattling the Harrisons' window. So George's early influences included George Formby, Cab Calloway, Django Reinhardt, and Hoagy Carmichael. And by the 1950s, Carl Perkins and Lonnie Donegan were significant influences. In 1956, he had an epiphany. He was riding his bicycle and he heard Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel playing from a nearby house, and the song piqued his interest in rock and roll. And he often sat in the back of the class drawing guitars in the school books and later commented, "I was totally into guitars." He cited Slim Whitman as another early influence, and the first person I ever saw playing a guitar was Slim Whitman, either a photo of him in a magazine or live on television. Guitars were definitely coming in. And George said his earliest memory was when he was standing on a leather stool and singing folk singer Josh White's One Meatball to his family's great delight. And his sister Louise said that George loved to perform for his family. George had fun growing up, she said, and was always the center of attention. Even then, George made up silly songs like "I'm a pink toothbrush and you're a blue toothbrush," and yodeled along with Hank Williams on Blue Yodel 94. Now George gets guitar. When George's friend offered to sell him a guitar for £3 and 10 shillings, he asked his mother Louise, and she allowed George to buy the beginner's guitar, and he sat up all night practicing. Wikipedia said that at first, the father, Harold Harrison, wasn't sure about George's playing music. However, in 1956, he bought George a Dutch Eggman flat-top acoustic guitar. So one of the father's friends taught Harrison how to play Whispering, Sweet Sue, and Dinah, inspired by Donegan's music. Harrison formed a skiffle group, the Rebels, with his brother Peter and a friend Arthur Kelly. And on the bus to school, Harrison met Paul McCartney, who also attended the Liverpool Institute, and the pair bonded over their shared love of music. So in George's former sister-in-law, Dr. Jenny Boyd's book, Not Only Rock and Roll, there was an interview with George, and he said, since they really appreciated music, his parents, they encouraged me. My mom really liked the idea of me playing because Dad was always out working at night or doing shift work. There was a friend of my father's who he remembered used to play guitar when they were on the ships together, so he got him to teach George. And I'm sure that set a pattern in my music because he taught me all those old songs. He taught me all the chords to what you would call dance band music, and that stayed with me till this day. He was a great help to me, showing me where to put my fingers and how different chords follow each other just by playing songs, really. In retrospect, I think he had an enormous influence on me. So George became obsessed about playing the guitar. He would stay up late and practice until his fingers bled and the cheap guitar's neck bent. And when George struggled, his mother would stay up all night, reassuring him that if he practiced enough, he'd be great one day. And then Louise, she met Aunt Mimi. In George Harrison Living in the Material World, George explained that Aunt Mimi hated him. My mother was a real big fan of music, and she was really happy about having the guys around, he said. And John was always keen to get out of his house because his Aunt Mimi was kind of very stern and strict, and she embarrassed him. And then George said, I remember going to John's house once I first met him, and I was still in the institute, and we were trying to look like Teddy Boys, which was like that style in those days. and I must have looked pretty good because she didn't like me at all. She was really shocked. She said, "Look at him. And who's this, bringing this boy around this house? Look at him. He looks dreadful, like a teddy boy." And he'd say, "Shut up, Mary, shut up." And then in Here Comes the Sun, the spiritual and musical journey of George Harrison, Joshua M. Green explained that George's mom was the Beatles' biggest fan in their early days. However, John's aunt wasn't so much a fan. George's mother, Louise, became a regular, and when her son stepped forward to sing Chic of Araby, or another of the few songs in his repertoire, she would cheer with the enthusiasm of a young fan. Louise was sitting in the audience one afternoon when John's Aunt Mimi showed up to check on what John had been doing with his days, and Louise recognized her and called out, "Aren't they great?" "I'm glad someone thinks so," Mimi huffed. "We'd all have had lovely, peaceful lives, but for you encouraging them." But Louise didn't pay her any mind, and she continued to support her son, and the band. So George's parents, they liked the Beatle fans. When the Beatles got into Beatlemania, Louise and George's father, Harold, invited eager young fans into their home for tea. Louise was also pen pals with the Beatles superfan for 5 years until she died in 1970. Louise did get aggravated by the fans at one time when she went to a concert in Manchester in 1963. She said, "Last Wednesday I went to Manchester, and I was really disgusted at the way the so-called fans just screamed right through the whole of the Beatles act," she wrote in a letter to a Beatles fan, per the BBC. "Nobody with any sense would pay and queue for a ticket just to stand on a seat and scream and not hear one sound from the stage." She said she was embarrassed by their behavior, and it made her embarrassed to be a female. But she still liked the fans for the most part. She enjoyed corresponding with them in letters and answered fan mail whenever she could. She invited fans in when they came by and kept their gifts around the house. And the Beatle fans recognized her efforts and sent a plaque in thanks. It was presented to Harold and Louise Harrison for the time and effort they've shown toward Beatle people everywhere. It read, "United Beatle Fans, Pomona, California, 1965. Well, George felt differently about the fans. He knew they were important, but he was a private person. He didn't enjoy fame, and he felt like the fans and wanting to see the Beatles could be dangerous. And Louise responded to letters from a Beatles superfan named Lorraine O'Malley from August 1964 until Louise died in 1970. And O'Malley first wrote to George's mother when she was 16 years old, and the letters went back and forth between the women. CheatSheet.com said there's a total of 55 letters. However, the final letter from Louise disturbed O'Malley because the handwriting was shaky and not at all like her regular writing. O'Malley wrote back to Louise immediately, concerned for the older woman's health. In August 1970, she got a letter back from Harold Harrison, George's father, saying that Louise had died in July after being ill for a year. Suddenly, O'Malley was without her pen pal. O'Malley kept all 55 letters between her and Louise, as well as signed photographs from all the 4 Beatles in a safety deposit box. And she's now 73 years old, so she decided to put the letters and photos up for sale with Omega Auctions based in Merseyside, and they're estimated to bring in just over $8,000. O'Malley said Louise wrote to about 200 girls. "I can only imagine how time-consuming it was. I don't know if she wrote to the others as frequently as me. She always knew what to say to the fans to indicate that George was involved." So O'Malley didn't keep Louise's letters to sell them later on. They meant a lot to her. She wanted to pass them on to her children who were interested in them, but she thinks that they didn't want the responsibility of knowing, and they didn't know what to do with them, so she decided to sell them. So George wondered why his mother wanted to do fan mail. When the Beatles became famous, it didn't affect just the Beatles, but their parents too. John Lennon's Aunt Mimi didn't associate much with Beatle fans. However, Ringo Starr and George's parents willingly invited busloads of fans who traveled to Liverpool from all over the world into their homes, and Louise looked after George's fans. Each week she traveled to Beatles fan club headquarters in Liverpool to pick up batches of promotional photos. Then she returned home and stayed up late answering fan mail longhand, often writing 2,000 letters per month. Shelves along one wall of their new home displayed gifts sent from all around the world. On George's 21st birthday, almost 1 million cards, letters, and gifts arrived at the Harrison house. 7 truckloads of mail filled their home's entry. The postal department said it was the most mail delivered to one address outside the royal family. Meanwhile, screaming fans mobbed the house, and some even kissed the doorknob. Harold and Louise became celebrities like the Beatles. And people, she said, always think we must be different now because of George. We went to a fan's wedding the other day, and people said, how can you enjoy yourselves with the likes of us? They expect us to wear mink all the time. In a 1968 interview, Louise explained that she got fan mail from most parts of the world. And she said when George saw the fan mail, he would always tell her that she was more popular than him. Louise said he had a good laugh about it, especially when he reads some of them and they say, "Dear Mum, you know," and he says, "Who's this then?" and laughs. And then George said, to her way of thinking, a letter from a stranger halfway around the world deserved a personalized response, and maybe even a snippet of lining from one of her son's old coats. It never occurred to her that the letter might have been sent by a stalker, or that someone had found their home address and chose to invade their privacy. Now we have George's love for his mom. Louise said one time when the group came home to practice, I remember I'd given them all beans and toast one evening, and it was several months before John's mother died, and he was just getting really close to her. And I overheard him say to Paul, "I don't know how you can sit there and act normal with your mother dead. If anything like that happened to me, I'd go off me head." So when John's mother did die, he didn't seem to go off his head, but he wouldn't come out of it. I forced George to go around and see him to make sure he was still playing in their group and just didn't sit and brood. They all went through a lot together, even in those early days, and they always helped each other. George was terrified that I was going to die next. He would watch me carefully all the time, and I told him not to be so silly. I wasn't going to die. And when he got married, his mom said, I felt as if I'd lost everything. Quite silly, really, as we were in the car with them returning from the ceremony. George took my hand and said, "It doesn't mean because I'm married I don't need you anymore, Mom. We need you more now. He's such a lovable son and cares about how people feel." She said that on George's marriage to Patty. In his 1980 memoir, I Me Mine, George wrote that deep blue came to him when his mother was very ill and dying. I wrote Deep Blue during the making of All Things Must Pass LP, George wrote. It's a bit obscure as it was. It's only a B-side at the Bangladesh single, and it never appeared on any album. It was written during the year my mother was very ill and dying, and after going to the hospitals over and over again. It's that smell and the whole atmosphere of doom that's in those hospitals. So George was the baby of the family, and he was loved by his whole family, and his biggest fan was his mother, Louise. She encouraged his love of music, and I'm sure she persuaded her husband to buy George a guitar when he asked for one as a boy. Louise would sit with him and give him encouragement when he wanted to give up. She was so proud of him, she became his representative by handling his fan mail and writing to the fans who loved George. And she kept up the fan mail till she died in 1970. George loved his mom and became worried when Paul and John's mothers died, and luckily George was able to spend more time with her, more than Paul and John did with their moms. The loss, though, was a hard one to take, I'm sure, because of the special bond that they shared throughout their lives. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. And be sure to click on the notification bell, and you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And I wish everybody a great day. Tune in again soon to the Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.